"Dad, there's something barking inside the tree." I didn't mean to shout it so loud, but my voice just kind of jumped out of my mouth the second I leaned over and heard it. The hollow in the old oak at the edge of Miller's field wasn't just whistling with wind like it usually did. This time, it barked. Short, high-pitched yelps, like a puppy that's stuck or scared. And I knew dogs. I knew them better than I knew most kids at school. I'd grown up around dogs. We had 4 at home, and I volunteered at the shelter with my mom every Saturday. So I knew what it meant when a bark had that sharp little edge to it, like panic wrapped in fur. That tree had something inside, and I wasn't about to walk away from it. My dad came jogging over from the truck, wiping his hands on the rag he always kept in his back pocket. He looked from me to the hollow like maybe I was pulling a prank. But then the bark came again. Louder this time, and I saw his eyebrows rise. "What in the world?" he murmured, dropping to one knee. "You're right. That's a dog." We both stared into the hollow. It was about chest high, wide enough to fit a basketball, but dark as night past the opening. Dad pulled out his phone and clicked on the flashlight app, shining it in there. That's when I saw it. 2 big brown eyes, wide open and staring straight out. A tiny snout pushed forward, quivering. The bark came again, but now that we were closer, I could tell it was mixed with little whimpers. The poor thing was stuck deep inside the tree. "Looks like a pup," Dad said quietly. "Real young." My heart squeezed. I didn't know how it got in there, but I knew we had to get it out, and fast. Dad tried reaching in, but the opening narrowed too quickly. "We'll need tools, maybe a handsaw, and something to coax it out. Go back to the truck, get the jerky." I didn't wait to hear more. I sprinted back across the field to where our old red truck was parked under the shade of the pecan trees. The glove box always had a few sticks of beef jerky Dad kept for snacks. I grabbed 2 and ran back, waving them like magic wands. Dad had already laid out a small toolkit. "We'll need to be careful," he warned. "Can't hurt the tree too much, but we've got to make a bigger opening." I crouched near the base of the tree, holding the jerky near the opening. The eyes disappeared for a second, then reappeared. A tiny, trembling nose reached out, sniffing like it wanted to believe I was friendly. "It's okay," I whispered. "We're going to help you. Promise." It took the better part of an hour. Dad sawed slowly, carefully, widening the entrance just enough. I kept talking to the pup the whole time, offering jerky in small bites. After a while, he started crawling forward, inch by inch, until finally, with a little help from Dad's gloved hands, he slid out. He was filthy. Covered in bits of bark and dried sap, his fur was matted and sticky. But he was beautiful. Some kind of mix, maybe shepherd and spaniel, with floppy ears and white-tipped paws. He blinked up at me like I was the first good thing he'd seen in a while. I scooped him up, careful not to hurt him, and he melted into my arms like he'd been waiting for that moment all his life. "We're taking him home," I said, not even asking. Dad nodded. "Yeah, he needs a bath, food, and probably a vet check. Poor guy's been through something." I didn't stop holding him all the way to the truck. He didn't try to squirm or bark again. Just curled up on my lap like he'd decided I was his person now. Back home, my mom took one look at the pup and gasped. "Where did you find him?" "In a tree," I said. "I'm serious." She gave me a look, then noticed how calm the puppy was in my arms. Her whole face softened. "All right, let's get him cleaned up." We named him Hickory, after the kind of tree we found him in. Even though it wasn't technically a hickory, we figured it sounded better than naming him Oak. Hickory had a nice ring to it. That night, after he'd had a bath and eaten half a bowl of kibble, he finally barked again. Just once. And it wasn't scared this time. It was a happy, short bark, the kind that lets you know a dog feels safe. I couldn't stop smiling. But that was just the start. Over the next few days, we noticed something strange about Hickory. He wasn't just a regular pup. He knew things he shouldn't. He'd bark right before the doorbell rang. He'd sit facing the window minutes before the mail truck pulled up. One night, he ran to my dad's room, barking frantically, and 10 seconds later, Dad's blood sugar monitor beeped with an alert. "Did he smell it?" my mom asked. How could he know? We didn't have answers, but we were starting to think this dog came into our life for a reason. That's when I decided I'd start keeping track of everything Hickory did. A little journal by my bed where I wrote down every odd thing, just in case. Because dogs don't just end up trapped in trees for no reason. And maybe Hickory wasn't lost. Maybe he was waiting. Hickory barked at the attic last night, 3 times. That was how I started the next journal entry. It was just after breakfast, and the kitchen still smelled like toast and eggs, the kind of warm, cozy smell that clings to your clothes. Hickory was lying at my feet under the table, chewing on the corner of a squeaky toy shaped like a raccoon. He didn't bark often, but when he did, it always meant something. I leaned back in my chair, watching him. 3 barks, all sharp, like he wanted us to listen. Mom, wiping the table with a rag, gave me a little smile. "Probably just heard a mouse up there. It's an old house, sweetie." "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. Hickory didn't bark for mice. Not the way he barked last night. It was right after midnight. I'd just turned off my bedside lamp when he sat up from his bed in the corner, stared at the ceiling, and barked. Once. Waited. Then again. Then once more. Dad poked his head in from the mudroom, slipping on his boots. "I'll check the attic later. Might be a squirrel, or that loose shutter again." But by the time the sun set, nobody had gone up there yet. I couldn't stop thinking about it all day. Even while I helped Dad rake leaves or cleaned out the chicken coop, Hickory's barks echoed in my mind. And Hickory was different today, too. He kept glancing at the ceiling, even while he chewed or napped. His ears perked every time the floorboards creaked upstairs. So that evening, after dinner, I made up my mind. "I'm going up," I announced, "to check the attic." Mom raised an eyebrow, pausing over her dishwashing. "With your dad?" "With Hickory," I corrected. "He's the one who heard something." Dad looked up from his paper and shrugged. "Long as you're careful. Flashlight's in the drawer by the pantry, and take a broom in case you need to poke around." The attic in our house wasn't the spooky kind you see in horror movies, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. The stairs creaked like they were made of haunted wood, and the ceiling was so low in places you had to duck. But it was ours, and I'd been up there 100 times. Hickory followed close behind as I climbed the steps, flashlight in one hand, broom in the other. The air got cooler the higher we went, and dust danced in the beam of the light as I opened the attic door. I scanned the room. Old boxes, a few Christmas decorations, some furniture we didn't use anymore. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Hickory stepped past me, nose twitching. He padded over to a box near the window, an old chest I barely remembered. He sniffed it, sat down, and barked. Once, loud. I jumped. Okay, I hear you." The box wasn't locked, just latched. I opened it slowly. Inside were stacks of books, a dusty blanket, and a dog collar. It was faded red, the kind that had probably been bright once but had dulled over the years. The tag was still attached, shaped like a little bone. It read, Rufus. I blinked. Rufus? Hickory sniffed it again, then sat back and gave a soft whine. Something about that name stirred a memory. I carried the collar downstairs and into the kitchen. Mom, who's Rufus? She looked up, startled. Her hand froze mid-wipe. Where'd you find that? In the attic, in a box Hickory barked at. She dried her hands and took the collar gently, running her fingers over the tag. He was our first dog. Your dad's, really. Had him before you were born. He ran away one stormy night and never came back. We thought, well, maybe a coyote got him, or he wandered off too far. Hickory nudged her hand gently. I glanced at Hickory. Why would he bark at this? He never met Rufus. No, she said slowly. But maybe he knows Rufus was important. Hickory looked up at us both like he understood every word. That night, I added a new note to my journal. Barked 3 times at the attic. Led me to Rufus's collar. Why? Is he trying to tell us something? The next few days felt like something had shifted. Hickory stayed close to me, more than usual. He followed me room to room, sometimes stopping in a doorway and staring like he was waiting for something. Or someone. On Wednesday, we visited the shelter. It was our usual routine. Hickory came too, though most dogs weren't allowed inside unless they were staying. But he'd become a sort of honorary mascot. Everyone loved him. The staff called him the Lucky Charm. As soon as we walked in, Hickory froze, then barked, not loud, but sharp, like a signal. He trotted over to a kennel halfway down the row and sat. Inside was a thin, shaggy mutt with tired eyes and a limp in his back leg. That's Max, said Sharon, the front desk volunteer. Brought in last week, got hit by a bike or something. He's shy, doesn't eat much. I watched Hickory. He didn't bark again, just pressed his nose against the bars. Max looked up, tilted his head, and slowly came forward. They touched noses through the gate. They know each other? I asked. Sharon shook her head. Not unless they met in another life. We ended up taking Max out for a walk. He was hesitant at first, limping and sniffing cautiously. But Hickory stayed right beside him, patient and gentle, like a big brother guiding him. On the way home, Hickory licked Max's ear in the truck bed. You want us to take him, don't you? I asked. Hickory wagged his tail once. I turned to my parents. Please? They didn't need much convincing. We brought Max home that evening, gave him a bath, fed him, set up a bed beside Hickory's. For the first time since we'd met Hickory, he slept curled up next to someone else. That weekend, Dad built a new dog run behind the shed. It wasn't huge, but it was cozy and shaded. Hickory watched every nail and board like he was supervising. The next week, he barked twice at the shed door. Inside was a nest of kittens. Their mother was gone, nowhere in sight. Hickory had found them. We fed them, cared for them, and once they were old enough, we found them homes. Every single one with friends we knew would treat them right. I didn't know how Hickory always seemed to know. Where to look, when to listen, who needed help. But he did. And that's when the letters started showing up. The first was a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a small note, typed in simple font. You found him. Thank you. I read it 3 times before I could even speak. Someone left this in the mailbox. No postage. Just placed it there. Mom frowned. That's odd. Dad turned it over in his hands. You think this is about Hickory? Maybe. But who sent it? That night, Hickory stood by the window, tail swishing slowly, ears alert. And I realized the tree wasn't the end of the mystery. It was the beginning. The second letter came 2 days later. Same white envelope, same clean typeface. This one had only 4 words. He's not the only one. That was it. No signature, no return address, no explanation. I found it tucked between the pages of my science workbook, which had been left in the screened-in porch overnight after I'd fallen asleep doing homework. At first, I thought one of my parents was playing a joke, but the way Mom's hands shook slightly when she read it told me she hadn't put it there. And Dad? He read it twice, frowned, and said, "I don't like this. Feels like someone's been watching." Hickory sat by the porch door the whole time, nose pointed toward the woods, like he was waiting for something. That night, I added a new entry to the journal. Another letter. Says he's not the only one. What does that mean? Are there more dogs like him? More messages? In the following days, I watched Hickory more closely than ever. He kept doing odd things. He'd stop mid-walk and stare at nothing. He'd whine at corners of rooms where there was nothing but shadow. Once, he led me into the garage, only to circle around the old rocking chair 3 times before pawing at the floor. So I pried up a few floorboards. There was an old box beneath them, not dusty or cobwebbed like you'd expect after years of hiding. It was clean, carefully placed. Inside was a photo of a boy and a golden retriever, sitting by the same tree we found Hickory in. The photo was dated August 1983. The boy looked about my age, maybe younger. He wore a red shirt and had freckles on his nose. The dog? It looked exactly like Hickory. I brought it to my dad. He took one look and muttered, "That's impossible." He stared at the picture longer than I'd ever seen him look at anything. "That tree," I said quietly. "That's the same one, right?" He nodded. "Sure is. And that boy, I think that's Jason Miller." "Who?" "Old classmate of mine. His family used to own Miller's Field. Moved away a long time ago. His dog went missing right before they left." I looked at Hickory. "Do you think this is that dog?" "No way," Dad said. "That dog'd be over 40 by now. But the resemblance is something." That night, Hickory slept restlessly. He whined in his sleep and kicked his paws like he was running. I stayed up with him, petting him gently until he calmed. I tried not to imagine the dreams he was having. We decided to reach out to Jason Miller. It wasn't easy. He wasn't on any social media. Took us 3 days of asking around before we found a phone number through the library's historical society. Dad made the call. Jason agreed to come visit. He arrived on a Saturday morning, driving a dusty blue pickup and wearing a cap with the logo of a lumber company. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes were sharp. The second he stepped out and saw the tree, his face went pale. "I've seen this before," he said. "Looks like Mr. Halpern's writing." "Mr. Halpern?" "Used to be the town historian. Passed away 10 years ago. Collected stories, local legends, had a whole room full of papers, maps, clippings." Mom looked thoughtful. "I think his niece donated everything to the library archives." I made up my mind then and there. After breakfast, I biked into town with Hickory trotting beside me. It wasn't far, and we knew the path well. The librarian, Mrs. Green, smiled when I asked about Mr. Halpern's files. "Back room," she said, handing me a key. "Bottom drawers, labeled Oral Histories. You'll be there a while." I was. Hours passed while I combed through folders. Most of it was boring stuff, birth records, maps, land deeds. But then I found a file labeled The Dog Watchers. Inside were notes, sketches, interview transcripts. The first page began with a sentence. Every 50 years, they return. I sat back, heart pounding. The file detailed stories dating back to the early 1900s, each one told by someone who claimed they'd found a dog in an unusual place, an attic, a barn, a well, a church, always alone, always barking, and always special. Dogs that could sense storms hours ahead. Dogs that led children away from danger. Dogs that barked just in time to save someone from a heart attack, a fire, a broken beam. They were always found by kids, always in the quiet corners of town, and always during the 5th decade. I looked at the dates, 1925, 1975, and now 2025. I looked down at Hickory. He sat beside me, quiet, eyes fixed on mine. "You're one of them," I whispered. There was more. A page titled Patterns listed sites: the orchard, the field, the church ruins, the covered bridge. All places Hickory had led me or looked toward. Another page. Sightings still unexplained. It listed a name I didn't recognize. Lucas Derry. Disappeared 1975. Age 12. Last seen near Oak Hill. I copied down everything I could and biked home, my backpack stuffed with notes. That night, we sat around the kitchen table, going over what I found. Dad didn't say much at first. Then he stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled down an old shoebox. Inside were photos. Us, the dogs, and one of me as a toddler sitting on the same patch of ground near the tree where Hickory had appeared. "He's always been near," Dad said quietly, "even before we found him." Mom pulled out her phone. "I'm going to call your Uncle Rick. He used to live near Oak Hill. Maybe he remembers something about Lucas Derry." While they called, I walked out to the porch with Hickory. The stars were out, clear and bright. Clover trotted up and lay beside us. Jasper came too. The three of them sat quietly, like they were waiting. The wind rustled the trees, and I thought about the others, the dogs in the photos, the kids who found them, the families that kept them. How many had there been? What did it mean to be returned? The next day, Uncle Rick called back. Said he remembered Lucas. Quiet kid, always hiking alone. Disappeared during a camping trip. No trace ever found. Just his dog's collar hanging on a tree branch. I looked at Hickory. "You knew him, didn't you?" Hickory stood and walked to the back fence. Barked once, the same bark he gave when something was waiting. We followed him to Oak Hill. It was just a rise in the woods now, overgrown with vines. At the top was a stone marker, half sunk into the dirt. It had no name, just the year, 1975. Hickory circled it once, sat, then looked at me. I pulled out my journal and started writing. I don't know what made me look under my bed that morning. Maybe it was the soft shuffle I heard just as I was waking up. Or maybe it was the way Hickory had spent the whole night sleeping with one ear perked toward the floor. Either way, I leaned over the edge of my mattress, pushed my flashlight into the shadows, and saw it. A third envelope. This one was sealed with a red sticker shaped like a paw print. I sat up quickly, heart thumping. Hickory, who had been lying at the door, walked over and sat down beside me. He didn't bark, just watched. I peeled the sticker off and unfolded the paper inside. The message was longer this time. "You've seen what he can do, but some doors once opened cannot be closed. Follow the map, but not alone. Midnight, Hillstone Trail." There was a crude sketch drawn beneath the words. Just a single winding path leading to a clearing marked with an X. I didn't recognize it at first, but when I showed it to Dad, his eyes narrowed. "That's behind the old mill road," he said. "Haven't heard that name in years. Hillstone Trail's mostly overgrown now. You planning on going?" I nodded. "Midnight." He gave me a long look. "Then I'm going too." So that night, at exactly 11:30, we packed flashlights, bottled water, and 2 leashes. Hickory and Clover were ready before we even opened the back door. Jasper waited by the truck, tail wagging slowly like he already knew. We parked where the trail used to begin. The road had long since turned to gravel, then to dirt. Hickory took the lead, nose to the ground, his steps sure. Clover followed close behind, occasionally glancing back to check we were still there. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees became. Moonlight spilled through only in narrow beams, turning the underbrush silver. I kept my flashlight low, watching the trail for signs of the marker. At exactly midnight, Hickory stopped. We'd reached a small clearing, just like the map showed. In the center was a stone ring, barely raised from the ground, moss-covered and cracked with age. Beside it stood a wooden post with an old tin sign that read simply, "Watcher's Rest." I walked toward the post, brushing off vines and leaves. Something glinted behind it, a 4th envelope, this one tucked into the crack between the wood and the stone base. Inside, a new message. "Bury what was lost. Speak the name. Wait." There was a small box wrapped in cloth beneath the stone ring. Carefully, we lifted the top. Inside was a collar, just like before. The tag read, "Lucas." My breath caught. "Lucas Derry?" I asked. Dad nodded, voice tight. "Must be. But why here? What's this supposed to be?" I looked at Hickory. He stood at the edge of the ring, tail still, ears forward. Clover whimpered once, nudging the edge of the stone with her paw. "I think this is where it happened," I whispered. "Where he disappeared." The box had a small metal spade tied to it. Without another word, I knelt beside the stone and began digging. The soil was soft, damp with recent rain. I made a hole just big enough, then placed the box inside. "Lucas Derry," I said aloud. "Wherever you are, we remember." The woods held their breath. Then Hickory barked. Once, short, clear, and from the shadows came a low rustle. Something moved beyond the trees. Not fast, not loud, but enough to make us all turn. A shape emerged. Small, thin. A boy, no older than 12, stepped into the light. He wore an old scout jacket and muddy jeans. His hair was damp with dew, and his eyes wide with confusion. Dad took a step back. "No way." The boy blinked at us. "What year is it?" My mouth was dry. "It's 2025. He looked down at himself. "I was walking here. And then it got dark. I thought I saw Bandit. He ran off and I followed." Hickory barked again. The boy turned and stared. "Bandit?" He dropped to his knees, reaching out, and Hickory walked slowly to him, pressing his forehead to the boy's chest. I felt tears sting my eyes. "Lucas," I said, "you've been missing for 50 years. He looked at me like I'd said something impossible. It can't be." We brought him home. No one believed it at first. Not the authorities, not the hospital, not even the neighbors. But blood tests matched a sample from a decades-old case file. It was him. Somehow. He remembered everything. The trail, the fog, the feeling of being lost and found at the same time. He said Hickory had appeared to him, just like now, twice, both times leading him to safety, both times surrounded by silence. He stayed with us at first. The police kept asking questions, doctors ran tests, but nothing explained the missing time. He hadn't aged. He was still 12. And Hickory never left his side. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one in the mailbox, tucked between bills. The note inside said, "One has returned, but others wait, listen, follow, remember." We knew it wasn't over. I started marking a map, every trail, every old landmark, every hollow or hill where Hickory paused. Clover and Jasper began barking at places too, each dog taking turns leading us to old sheds, wells, forgotten schoolhouses, places where things had been lost. Each one held something. A photograph, a collar, a name. Each one brought something back. And with every return, Hickory would sit for just a moment longer, like he was listening for something deeper, something beyond what we could hear. One night, as I was writing in the journal, I asked him quietly, "What happens when they've all been found?" He looked out the window, toward the tree line, and didn't answer. By the time we found the 6th collar, the air in town had changed. It wasn't just the weather, though late autumn was creeping in fast, painting the trees with fire-colored leaves and chilling the morning air. No, it was something else. Something in the way people looked at Hickory now. Like they knew there was more to him than just a lucky dog. Like they'd started to remember things they hadn't thought about in years. That week, the mayor visited our house. She arrived in the early evening, a pale green scarf tied tight around her neck and a stack of old newspapers in her arms. Hickory met her at the driveway, tail still, head tilted. He didn't bark, but he watched her closely. "I know this sounds strange," she said as she stepped inside, "but I think it's time someone told you what really happened back in '75. We gathered around the living room. My mom made tea. Hickory lay down beside the fireplace, but his ears stayed pointed up. The mayor laid out the newspapers on the coffee table. Headlines jumped out. "Boy vanishes on local trail, dog returns, but no sign of Lucas Dairy community search called off after 10 days. Back then, she said, there were rumors, old stories. Most folks thought they were just that, stories, but those of us who grew up around here, we heard whispers about the tree dogs, about the watchers." I glanced at my dad. He looked surprised, but not shocked. "Some believed," the mayor continued, "that certain dogs appeared every so often, only to certain people. Always during times of trouble, always to help. They were guides, protectors. But when Lucas disappeared, the stories changed. People got scared. Thought maybe the watchers weren't always enough." She looked down at Hickory. "But you brought him back. You're bringing all of them back." I told her about the letters, the map, the collars and names, the tin box in the orchard. The notes tucked into the corners of our lives like breadcrumbs leading us through the woods. She listened carefully, then nodded. "I think there's more to find, and I want to help." We formed a plan, not just us anymore. Now it was a group, people who remembered, people who believed. We called ourselves The Circle, a name pulled from one of Halpern's notes. Only a circle can return what has been lost. Hickory became our compass. Clover and Jasper, too. One by one, they led us to places where time had thinned, places between then and now. One cold morning, Hickory stopped at the base of a burned-down barn at the edge of town. The land had been sold years ago, but no one ever built on it. He barked once, then again. We started digging where he pawed. 3 feet down, we found a sealed jar. Inside, a faded photo of a man in uniform kneeling beside a black lab, a small metal badge, and a letter. It was addressed to someone named Henry. Dated 1945. The badge belonged to the local fire brigade. The man in the photo? He'd been presumed dead in a barn fire during a training drill, one nobody remembered until we brought the photo to the station. An old retired firefighter came by the next day, said he'd been a rookie when it happened. "We couldn't save him," he said, holding the photo like it was gold. "But the dog? He made it out, ran through fire, pulled me out." He tapped the picture. "That's Ace. The reason I'm alive." Another returned. More letters came. Tucked into backpacks, slid into coat pockets, left in lunchboxes. Follow the fallen tree. Where the bell once rang. Dig near the roots. We followed every clue. Found more collars, more photos, more names. Every time we uncovered something, someone in town remembered. A neighbor, a teacher, an old friend. Pieces of history were falling into place like a puzzle we didn't know we were building. And through it all, Hickory watched. Quiet. Steady. Like he already knew the end. One night, he sat on the porch for hours, staring at the moon. I sat with him, wrapped in a blanket. The stars were sharp and famsa and bright. I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Do you remember all of them?" I asked. "The ones you've helped?" He didn't answer, of course. But I felt something then, a kind of knowing, like his presence was part of something much older than me, older than this town. The next day, the fog came. Thick, heavy, rolling in like a wave that refused to break. Hickory stood at the window all morning. Then he barked once, short and hard. I grabbed my bag. Dad and I loaded into the truck. Clover and Jasper jumped in without being called. We didn't even need the leash. The fog made the road strange, quiet, colorless, like we were driving through an old photograph. Hickory led us through it, walking ahead without hesitation. He took us to the old train yard. It had been closed for decades. Nothing there but rusted tracks and broken windows. But Hickory moved like he'd walked those rails yesterday. In the center of the yard was an old switch tower. The door groaned open when we pushed. Inside, the air was dry and still. Papers littered the floor. Cobwebs framed every corner. On the far wall, a name was scratched into the wood. June. We didn't know who she was, but Hickory barked again, and Jasper began digging beneath the floorboards. We found a metal box. Inside was a small blue ribbon, a crumpled sketch of a girl with a beagle, and another collar. This one was different, smaller, with an engraving on the underside. Return to the wind. That night, we took the box to the library. Mrs. Green opened the archives again, and we found her. June Marston, age 10. Disappeared in 1937. Last seen near the train yard. Her dog's name? Benny. No one had spoken her name in years. We returned the collar to the site the next morning. Hickory sat beside it, tail motionless, head lowered. The wind picked up. Just a whisper. But the fog began to lift, and I knew we were still only halfway through. The journal pages were piling up now. Drawings, maps, taped-in clippings. And I added one more sentence to the last entry. They're not just returning dogs, they're returning stories, and stories keep people alive. That night, Hickory barked 3 times, and I didn't sleep at all. The 7th letter wasn't left at our house. It was handed to me. That morning, Hickory and I were walking past the old post office, heading to the general store for milk and batteries, when a man I'd never seen before stepped out from behind a newspaper stand. He was older, maybe 70, wearing a long brown coat that looked too heavy for the season. His face was lined, beard short and neat, and his eyes were sharp in a way that reminded me of Hickory's. Alert, like he was always seeing more than anyone else. He didn't say a word, just held out an envelope and nodded once before disappearing down the alley beside Harper's tailor shop. I called out to him, even jogged a few steps, but he was gone. Hickory didn't bark or chase. He just stood by my side, calm, like he'd been expecting it. Inside the envelope was a single piece of parchment, not paper. Parchment, the kind that crinkles like old maps. Written in dark ink, in cursive too neat to be modern, were 3 words: The Root Gate. Below it, a date and time: November 8th, sunset. That was in 5 days. I showed my parents, showed the mayor, showed the circle. No one had heard the phrase before. The Root Gate. What did it mean? Where was it? And what were we meant to do? That night, I sat on the porch swing with Hickory. He lay beside me, his head on my foot, eyes blinking slowly. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and stars were starting to show. "Do you know what the Root Gate is?" I asked softly. He didn't respond, but the next morning, he took me there. We walked past the orchard, past the burned barn, into a stretch of woods behind the ridge I'd never explored. It was older here, the trees thicker, bark darker, their roots gnarled like knotted ropes above the soil. Hickory walked with purpose, stopping only once to sniff at a broken tree stump before continuing. Eventually, we reached a clearing. Not large, maybe the size of a living room, but at its center, 3 tree trunks twisted together in a way I'd never seen. They'd grown into one another, forming an arch from roots to branches, and the ground beneath them dipped like a shallow bowl. Hickory stopped at the edge of it, looked back at me. "The Root Gate," I whispered. He stepped into the bowl, turned once, and lay down. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, staring at the trees, the way they'd fused like something out of a fairy tale. When I finally crouched beside Hickory, I noticed something carved into the inner bark of one of the trunks. Words, faded but legible. "Every return needs a witness." That evening, we gathered the circle. We cleared the path as best we could. I made a sketch of the Root Gate, wrote the inscription down in my journal, and marked the spot on the town's old map. Over the next few days, nothing unusual happened. Hickory was quiet. Clover and Jasper stayed close. No new letters appeared. Then November 8th arrived. We packed supplies, lanterns, snacks, blankets, and reached the Root Gate just before sunset. The circle stood in a loose ring, quiet, unsure. Hickory stepped into the bowl again, followed by Clover and Jasper. We waited. And at the exact moment the sun dipped below the ridge, a soft sound filled the clearing, like wind chimes without chimes. A hum, faint but rising. The roots beneath the dogs began to glow, dimly at first, then brighter, like coals warming in a fire. From the edge of the trees, something moved. A figure, then another. They stepped out one by one, children, teens, a few adults, all dressed in clothes from different times. Some wore scout uniforms. others old-fashioned dresses, overalls, bell-bottom jeans, and beside each of them was a dog. We counted 12. Each pair stood silently. Some looked around in awe. Others stared straight at Hickory. A woman stepped forward. Her hair was gray, but her face was young. Her dog, a massive husky with one blue eye, stood tall beside her. "You've opened it," she said. Her voice echoed, but gently. "The route gate connects places lost to time. Only those guided by the Watchers can return." "Are you spirits?" I asked. She smiled. "No, not quite. We were displaced, held between moments. The dogs, your Watchers, they anchored us." "But why now?" Dad asked. "Because the circle was broken in 1975, she said. Lucas's disappearance unraveled the path. But you mended it. One caller, one memory, one return at a time." A boy with red hair and a beagle stepped forward. "I remember you," he said, looking at me. "You called my name. Benny barked. I followed the sound." I felt tears in my eyes. I didn't even know his name. But somehow, we'd found him. The woman placed her hand on Hickory's head. "He is the last of the root-born, the one meant to seal what was opened." "Seal it?" I asked. "Does that mean he has to leave?" She didn't answer. The dogs began to bark, once each, in perfect rhythm. A soft light rose from the center of the gate, swirling like mist. One by one, the figures stepped into it. As they did, they turned to us, smiling, waving. And then they were gone. The clearing was quiet. Hickory lay down again, but now he looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Like he'd run 100 miles and still had one more to go. We stayed with him as the stars came out. I wrote everything down in the journal. And then, as the moon rose high, Hickory stood and barked twice. And I knew there were still 2 left to find. Hickory didn't eat the next morning. He sniffed his bowl, looked at it, then turned away and curled up on the rug by the fireplace. Clover came over and nudged him gently, but he didn't move. Jasper lay beside him, like a sentinel. I sat on the floor, rubbing my hands together. "You're not done," I whispered. "You said so. 2 barks, 2 left." Mom brought over some cooked chicken. He took a few bites out of politeness but left the rest. It wasn't like him, not even on the days he was tired. That afternoon, we checked the mailbox. A letter. This one was different. Handwritten. The envelope smelled faintly of pine. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper, the kind with frayed edges and soft corners. "You're looking in the wrong direction. Some things aren't buried. They're locked." At the bottom was a simple drawing. A doorknob with a spiral etched into it. I turned to Hickory. "Locked? What's locked?" He stood up slowly, stretched his legs, and padded to the back door. Without looking at me, he gave one bark. Quiet. Low. We followed. This time it was different. He didn't lead us to the woods or a forgotten trail. He led us into town, to the old courthouse. The building had been closed for renovations over a year ago. The front doors were chained, but Hickory walked to the side, where a fire exit stood half-shaded by vines. I jiggled the handle. Unlocked. Inside, the place smelled like dust and plaster. Tarps draped over wooden benches. The light from the stained glass windows cast colored shadows across the floor. Hickory moved confidently through the aisles, turning down a hallway marked Employees Only. We followed him down a narrow flight of stairs. At the bottom, a metal door with a keypad lock I reached out and touched it. The keypad beeped and blinked green. Dad stared. How? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The door clicked. Beyond it was a room. Round, bare walls, no furniture, just a single wooden trunk in the center. Hickory walked to it and sat. I opened it. Inside were two objects, a leather collar and a key. Attached to the key was a note. She's waiting at the bell tower. Bring the boy. No signature. We took both and headed straight for the tower. The bell tower hadn't rung in decades. It stood at the edge of the cemetery, half hidden by overgrowth. The stairs up were steep, and the air grew colder the higher we climbed. Hickory didn't hesitate. He climbed every step, as if his legs had no age at all. At the top, in the room beneath the bell, we found a girl. She sat on the floor, hugging her knees, her face pale with dust and tears. She wore a blue hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled back into a loose braid. Next to her was a golden retriever, thin, shaking, but alert. She looked up at us. "You're not the ones I saw in the dream," she said. "But the dog, that's him." "What's your name?" I asked. "Emma." "How long have you been here?" "I don't know. Days, maybe longer. I walked up the tower when I heard the barking. I thought someone was in trouble, but then I couldn't leave." The air in the tower felt thick, heavy. I held out the key. "This is for you." She took it with trembling fingers, turned it in the lock behind her. There was no sound, but suddenly the air shifted. The golden retriever stood and licked her hand, then looked at Hickory. They touched noses. Emma stood. "Can I go home now?" We took her down the stairs. Her parents had filed a missing persons report 4 days ago. She was found with no bruises, no injuries. Just quiet. Distant. But she remembered everything. The dream. The sound of barking. A voice calling her name through the fog. One more returned. That night, Hickory ate. Slowly. But he ate. The circle gathered on our porch again. The mayor, the librarian, old neighbors, people who remembered the early stories. We told them about the locked room, the girl, the key and the last note. One left. I asked Hickory that night, as I wrote in the journal, "Is it you?" He didn't bark, just watched the trees sway in the wind. The final letter came the next day, not in the mailbox, not under a pillow or inside a shoe. It was folded inside the journal. "You know where to go. You've always known." It wasn't signed, but I knew. We waited until dusk. Then we followed Hickory back to where it all started, the tree in Miller's field. It was quiet. No wind, no birds, just the rustling of leaves under our feet. Hickory walked to the hollow and barked once, then again. Then looked at me. I knelt beside the tree and placed my hand inside. And I felt it. Wood, cold, carved with initials. I pulled it out. A small wooden box, no bigger than my palm. Inside, a photograph. Me, sitting by the tree, holding Hickory as a puppy. But I didn't remember this picture. There was something else. A tag. It read, "Return him home." I looked at Hickory. "Is this your collar?" He lay down at the base of the tree, his eyes on mine. Still, calm, And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know what came next. But I knew we were close, one left, and the tree was waiting. The photograph didn't make sense, not because it was blurry or damaged. On the contrary, it was crisp, like it had been taken yesterday. The lighting was soft, natural, like early morning sun. My hair looked exactly like it did now, and I was wearing a hoodie I'd only bought 2 weeks ago. But I had no memory of the photo being taken. And what shook me more was the look on my face. I wasn't smiling. I looked calm, peaceful, like someone who had just finished something important. And I was holding Hickory. He looked younger in the photo. No gray around his muzzle, no weathered lines around his eyes. Like the Hickory I first met in the hollow of this very tree. I held the photo tighter. Why is this here now? The wooden box didn't have anything else inside. No note, no collar, just the photo and the tag, the one engraved with "Return him home." I turned to Hickory, still lying at the base of the tree, and for a second I swore he smiled. Not with his mouth, but with his whole body. Like he knew this part was for me to figure out. The circle gathered that night. Everyone sat around the long table on our back porch, blankets wrapped around shoulders, mugs of tea in hand. I passed around the photograph. No one had seen it before, not even my parents. Dad held it for a long time. "You said you found it in the tree." I nodded. "Inside the hollow, like where Hickory was when we first heard him bark." The mayor tapped her fingers on her mug. "And the tag, what do you think it means?" "I think it means this was always the plan," I said. "Every return was leading to this. But it's not about someone else now. It's about him." "You think Hickory's the last return?" "No," I said. "I think he's the guide for the last return. And I think that's me." A silence fell over the group. Then Clover barked. Once, Hickory stood, and the moment shifted. We followed him out under the stars, through the back field and toward the woods, not speaking, just walking. The wind had a strange stillness, like it was holding its breath. Hickory led us beyond Miller's field, farther than we'd ever gone. He paused at the edge of the ravine. We'd passed this place before, but never crossed. The wooden bridge that once stood there had rotted away years ago. But now, the moonlight revealed something else, a narrow path of stone, hidden just below the brush. Solid enough to walk if we moved carefully. I crossed first. Hickory waited until I was on the other side, then followed. Clover and Jasper came too. The others stayed back, watching. On the other side was a grove. Circular. Quiet. Trees with trunks wide as rooms stood in a perfect ring. And at the center, a single post. Wooden. Weathered. With a metal plate nailed to its front. The plate read, "For the one who called him." A small brass latch opened a compartment in the post. Inside, a journal. It was mine, but older. Worn and full, I flipped through it. Page after page, entries written in my handwriting. Moments I hadn't lived yet, words I hadn't spoken, names I hadn't heard, and at the very end, a final line. He came to find me, but I had to remember to go back. I dropped to my knees, because I understood. Hickory hadn't just shown up in my life. I had called him, not with words, but with something else. Something older. A need. A longing. A promise made long ago, maybe even in another time. I looked at the tree line, at the moon above, at Hickory's eyes watching me. And I remembered something. A dream from when I was little. A dream where I stood in a grove just like this, holding a leash and calling out into the trees. I hadn't known what it meant then. I thought it was just imagination, but it wasn't. This place, this grove, was the echo of that memory. Clover sat down beside me. Jasper too. And then Hickory stepped forward and rested his head on my knee. I understood now. The last return wasn't a person. It was a moment, a forgotten promise, a circle closing. I pulled the tag from my pocket, held it against Hickory's collar. Return him home. But he was home. He always had been. I closed the journal and tucked it back into the post. The brass latch clicked softly. Hickory turned toward the trees, wagged his tail, then barked once. Not loud, not urgent, just a note of recognition. Then he walked forward, not disappearing, not vanishing, just walking into the dark like someone stepping through a doorway he knew well. Clover stayed beside me, Jasper too. We stayed there until morning, and Hickory didn't return. Not yet, but I wasn't scared, because some things leave only when they're finished. And this wasn't finished. Not yet. The morning light felt different that day. It wasn't brighter or warmer. It just felt more aware, like it was waiting with us. I hadn't slept. None of us had. Clover kept pacing the edge of the grove, ears twitching at every sound, while Jasper rested quietly, chin on his paws, eyes never leaving the path Hickory had taken. I watched the trees and waited. By mid-morning, the rest of the circle began to arrive. They came one by one, some carrying thermoses of coffee, others with blankets draped over their shoulders. No one asked questions. No one spoke of going home. They just stood with us. The post was still there, the journal sealed back inside. I hadn't opened it again, though I could feel it calling to me somehow, as if the version of myself who had written it was only a few steps ahead. We stayed all day. We built a small fire in the center of the grove and cooked soup from thermoses. When the sun dipped low again, I stood and walked back to the post. I opened the latch. The journal was gone. In its place was a single card. Handmade, rough edges, ink smudged. It said only this: "Begin the journey back." I turned it over. No signature, just a faint imprint, like a paw print stamped in dirt. I didn't know what it meant, but Hickory's bark echoed in my memory. Return him home. Maybe he hadn't left for good. Maybe the journey back didn't mean returning him to me, but returning me to something I'd left behind. That night, back at the house, I pulled out every old photo I had, every journal, every sketch, every letter I'd copied into my notebook. I laid them out across the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. And slowly, patterns began to emerge. The places Hickory had led us, the names we'd found, the notes tucked into old mailboxes, hollow trees, forgotten attics. They weren't random. They followed a spiral, a curve that started in the orchard, wound through the bell tower, the courthouse, the burned barn, and ended where we now stood, the grove. It was a map, but one not drawn on paper. It was built in memory. Clover nudged my arm. I looked down and she tilted her head toward the door. I followed her out onto the porch. She trotted to the edge of the field and barked once, then took off running. I grabbed my jacket and sprinted after her. Jasper followed without needing to be told. We crossed Miller's field, passed the ravine, climbed the ridge. Clover was fast, but not rushing. She paused every so often, checking that I was still behind her. She led us to a part of the woods I hadn't been since the very beginning. The old hunting cabin. It had collapsed years ago, little more than a skeleton of logs and rusted nails now. But Clover circled it, barking, tail high, nose low to the ground. Jasper sniffed at the old stone fireplace. Then they both stopped. Something moved in the shadows. A quiet rustle. A breath. And then Hickory. He stepped into the light like he'd only been gone a minute. His coat was cleaner somehow, his eyes even sharper. There was something regal in the way he carried himself, like someone who had crossed a great distance and returned not older, but fuller. He trotted to me, pressed his forehead against my hand, and sighed. I knelt. "You came back." He licked my palm once, then turned toward the old fireplace. There, half buried in leaves, was another box, smaller than the others. Hickory pawed at it gently until I picked it up. Inside was a compass. Its needle spun wildly, then stopped, pointing northeast. There was also a note. "You've found the edge. Now find the heart." I looked to Hickory. He wagged his tail once. The circle met again that night. I showed them the compass, the note, the route we had walked without even realizing it formed a shape. It wasn't a circle. It was a spiral, and we were at its center. "The heart," Dad said. "What could that mean?" "The beginning," I said. "Not where Hickory was found. Before that, the origin." The next morning, we followed the compass northeast, past every place we'd already visited, past roads that had long turned into roots and moss. We walked until the woods thinned. And then we saw it, a house, small, white, like it had been preserved in glass. No path led to it, no power lines, no fence. It was just there. We knocked. The door creaked open. Inside, the walls were covered in photographs. Dogs, children, forests. And in the center of the room, a table. On it, 12 collars, each one tagged. And in the middle, a 13th tag. Blank. Clover walked straight to it and sat. Then Hickory barked. 3 times. I picked up the tag and turned it over. Faintly, just beginning to appear, was my name. And I knew, without needing to be told, the next journey was mine to lead. I held the tag in my hand for a long time, staring at the faint outline of my name as it grew clearer with each passing second. No one spoke. Even the dogs stood still. Hickory sat beside me, his fur brushing against my leg, and I could feel his heartbeat. Steady, strong, grounding. A 13th tag. Blank until I touched it. The last step was never about finding something lost. It was about choosing what to become. The room in the White House was full of memory, but not the kind that belonged to any one person. It was layered. Thick, like tree rings, each photograph a snapshot of a moment someone had earned. People who'd followed the path, who had been called not by sound, but by purpose. Hickory nudged the tag once, then looked up at me with those warm, unshakable eyes. "You knew," I said. You've always known." He wagged his tail. Just once. I looked around the room again. 12 collars, 12 dogs. Each one had returned. Each one had led someone. And each time, the story grew. A spiral folding inward, pulling us to the heart. To me. I picked up the tag and slid it into my pocket. "All right," I whispered. "Let's finish it." The walk back wasn't quiet. Birds sang. Leaves crunched. It felt like the woods had been holding their breath for months and had finally exhaled. The circle was already gathered when we returned to the grove. They didn't ask questions when they saw the tag in my hand. They just made space. I stood where Hickory had lain the night he walked into the trees. The post was still there, still weathered and waiting. I pressed my palm against the wood, and it warmed under my touch. The compartment opened again, not just the latch, but the whole face of the post, folding outward like a puzzle unlocking itself. Inside was a stone bowl, and in it, a silver thread. I pulled the thread gently. It unraveled like ribbon, delicate but unbreakable. It stretched between my fingers and Hickory's collar, connecting us like a tether. And then, something remarkable happened. The other dogs stepped forward. Clover, Jasper, Max, and even little Benny, who had stayed with one of the circle families after being found. Each one lowered their heads, and from their collars, threads began to appear. Gold, blue, red, green. Each thread rose and twined toward the bowl, a net of light spanning time. Hickory barked once. I stepped into the circle of threads. And I spoke, not loudly, not with any prepared words, just the truth. I remember. The light brightened. The threads pulled taut, humming like a song with no words. The post shimmered, and slowly, from the grove itself, figures began to appear. Not ghosts, not illusions. Memories returning. The boy from the first photograph. The girl from the bell tower. The firefighter who survived. The boy with the beagle. One by one, they came. Not as spirits, but as the living echoes of what had been returned. And at the center, stepping into the circle like a star falling gently to earth, was the version of me from the photo. The one holding Hickory for the first time. He looked at me, not surprised, not confused, just understanding. "You called him," he said. "I called him," I agreed. "Then you know what to do." And I did. I reached out and touched Hickory's collar one last time. The silver thread hummed and then released. The light from the bowl poured into the grove like sunrise, and the grove shimmered with something deeper than light. Every name called, every tag placed, every story closed. The circle watched in silence as Hickory stepped forward, not alone, but with every memory beside him. He stopped in front of me and bowed his head. I pressed my forehead to his. "Thank you." And then he walked forward, into the center, into the light. Clover barked once, Jasper howled, and then the grove was quiet again. No wind, no birds, only peace. When we walked out of the woods, the path behind us closed. Not suddenly, not like a door slammed shut, but gently, as if the forest knew the story was done. I kept the tag. I wear it around my neck now, not as a symbol of loss, but of choice, of all the ways one life can return. The circle still gathers, though not every week, just when it's needed. Sometimes people show up with questions, or letters, or dreams they can't explain. And sometimes a dog appears where one wasn't before, looking into someone's eyes like they've always been waiting. We teach them to listen. We teach them to follow. And every once in a while, someone asks me if Hickory was real. And I say, only if you believe in being found. Because he found me. And in doing so, I remembered who I was meant to become. The guide for someone else, the beginning for another story. And just maybe, the next bark in the hollow tree